When it comes to what I'm complimented on the most by the ladies, it's obviously my personality. But when it comes to muscle groups, it's my quads and my arms. And because I already made a video on how to develop aesthetic legs, I figured I'd teach you how to build some crazy arms. If you don't know who I am, my name is Rios. I have a Bachelor of Science in Exercise Science. And because I'm here to make fitness great again, I'll be giving you a step-by-step guide on how to build aesthetic arms. Before I get into the tips, if you're looking for programs to help you build an aesthetic physique or to develop elite athlete athleticism, be sure to check out my 90-day aesthetic body blueprint or my 120-day peak athleticism package. But if you're interested in working with me directly, I just launched one-on-one coaching. All of these will be in the description. In this video, I won't be teaching you how to build your shoulders. The delts are technically part of the arms, but since I already made a guide on how to build your shoulders, they're not included in this video. Before I get into direct bicep and tricep training, I do want to emphasize that you still need to be doing your compound lifts, which is why it's so important to make sure that you have a great program. There have been a lot of research studies that have shown that compound lifts do build your arms pretty well. So it's important to make sure that you're doing these compound lifts and then incorporating some isolation work to add on to this. First, I'll start with the biceps. There are two heads of the biceps, the long head and the short head. So many people overthink this and they try and memorize which exercise emphasizes the long head and which exercise emphasizes the short head. This knowledge is kind of useless and I'll explain later why that is. But just remember that there are two heads of the biceps, with the long head being on the outside and the short head being on the inside. Both heads of the biceps have the exact same actions, which are elbow flexion, shoulder flexion since both heads cross the shoulder joint, and supination because unlike the triceps, the biceps insert on the radius. And if you don't know what supination is moving your wrist like this, and then pronation is moving your wrist downward like that. I bet some of you didn't know that the biceps do shoulder flexion and may be wondering, why don't I train my biceps with shoulder flexion? This is because the biceps are actually a weak shoulder flexor, so doing some sort of exercise like front raises won't do a great job at growing them. And you also may be wondering, why is supination so important for bicep training? Believe it or not, the biceps are actually not the strongest elbow flexor, and it's actually the brachialis which sits underneath the bicep. This is where supination comes in, as if you supinate your forearm, the biceps actually become the strongest elbow flexor, therefore leading to a greater bicep emphasis when you're performing exercises in supination. Now that I've discussed the basic anatomy of the biceps, now I'll go on to the best exercises to hit your biceps. And just like all the other muscle groups that I train, it's important to use a variety. And as I discussed earlier, learning about which exercises target the long and short head of the biceps becomes irrelevant if you use a variety of exercises. This is because if you make sure you're hitting your biceps in a variety of different ways, you're gonna be hitting the short and long head of the biceps, leading to complete development of both of these heads. If you want to learn about which head of the biceps is more active in different curl variations, you can, but I've noticed that it just confuses you and makes it harder to program. Because the biceps perform shoulder flexion, the position of your shoulder when doing exercises does impact it. I like to think of hitting the biceps in three different angles. The first would be shoulder flexion, aka hitting the biceps from a shortened position. Some good examples are a preacher curl and a high cable bicep curl. The next will be hitting your biceps from a neutral position, so this would be any sort of curl variation where your torso is upright. And the last will be hitting your biceps from a stretch position, aka when your shoulder is extended. Some good examples are an incline dumbbell curl and a cable curl variation where your elbow is behind your body. When it comes to these exercises, again, you do want to add variety. So you want to do bilateral exercises, some unilateral exercises, some cable, some free weights, and also play around with grip width. And just like all other muscles, you do want to add in some compound exercises, with my favorite being a chin up, where I'm more focused on curling myself up to the bar rather than pulling myself up. The reason why I like to add in compound exercises occasionally is because it allows me to load up the muscle far more than if I'm doing isolation exercises. Now into the triceps, and just like the biceps, we'll first look at the anatomy of the triceps. The triceps have three different heads: the long head, the medial head, and the lateral head. And just like the biceps, there's really no need to overthink this because all it does is confuse you. All three heads of the triceps perform elbow extension, but the long head of the tricep differs from the other two because it crosses the shoulder joint, so it actually performs shoulder extension as well. So unlike the medial and lateral head of the triceps, the long head is actually impacted by where your shoulder is positioned. There is a ton of debate about which exercises hit the long head of the triceps the best. There are some people that say that the long head of the triceps are hit better in overhead positions, and there are some people saying that they're not. But my base take is it doesn't fucking matter. As I stated earlier, if you're hitting a muscle from a variety of different angles, you're gonna get complete development. So essentially, if you're doing overhead tricep exercises and non-overhead tricep exercises, you're gonna be hitting the long head in one of these, so it doesn't really matter which one hits the long head better. So this leads to the exercises, and again, you wanna make sure you're hitting the triceps from a variety of different angles. The first being shoulder flexion, so any sort of overhead exercises like skull crushers or overhead cable tricep extensions. Next, you should be hitting your triceps with your shoulders in a neutral position, so any sort of tricep exercise where your arm is directly at your side. And the last exercise you should include is some sort of exercise where your triceps are being hit with the shoulders extended. Tricep kickbacks don't count for this, as a lot of the times when people perform tricep kickbacks, their shoulders end up being in the neutral position anyways, and it's kind of like a normal tricep extension but just bent over. So for this one, make sure that your elbow is behind your body, aka your shoulders extended. And for all these exercises, make sure you're using a variety, so sometimes use a rope, sometimes use a D handle, sometimes use a straight bar, sometimes do the exercise with one hand, sometimes with two. You get the point. And just like the biceps, I like to sometimes add in a compound lift that has a heavy tricep emphasis, with my favorite tricep focused compound exercises being a close grip bench variation and dips. Just keep in mind that compound lifts, aka presses, don't hit the long end of the triceps very well, but if you make sure you add in tricep isolation work from a variety of different angles, you'll get good development of the long end of the triceps. And that's a simple guide on how to develop aesthetic arms. I recently made a video about the only exercises you need to build an aesthetic physique, which you should check out.